Now, speaking of Israel, we just talked about them yesterday. I'm sure things couldn't be getting any worse after they just bombed 100 targets in a very small open-air prison. But it does get worse. Coming from Middle East Monitor, Israel warns it will use uncompromising force against Gaza. Wait, isn't this what they just did? Bombing 100 different targets in a very small location of a civilian area because of some alleged rockets that hit nothing and hurt no one? That seems like uncompromising force to me. I don't know about you. But see, this story is offensive in so many ways. Because it's offensive mostly for me because of how brazen they are to stand up with these utter lies. And it's not even lies. They're not denying that they hit them 100 times, but they're making it seem as if these two wayward rockets they claim attacked them, which I haven't seen any proof to suggest even were real, that those two wayward rockets were more worthy of condemnation than the 100 civilian targets they hit within Gaza because of that. That's literally what they think, or at least what they want you to think they think.
This report of yours, 7 minutes of utter nonsense. It's all lies, fabrications, twists of truths, bits of truths. It's an embarrassment for anybody who's looking to get the current situation in Gaza. They shouldn't come to you. You say that there's no proof that they were real, that these rockets ostensibly that went to Tel Aviv weren't real. Well, who is your what's your expertise? So when Israel shoots rockets onto Gaza and they say they shot 100 rockets, that certainly happened. That came from the same people. That's from Israel stating that. But when they claim that rockets came to Tel Aviv, then you don't believe them. No. And so what did Hamas say about bombs being flown out to Tel Aviv? So I found an article in Vox, which is a left-leaning online magazine, and it says, quote, in fact, it put out a statement saying that the rocket fire went against the national consensus and vowed to condemn the perpetrators. In other words, there was no denial from Hamas that rockets were flown from Gaza outside into Tel Aviv. And besides those two rockets that were flown to Tel Aviv, I hope you know, or probably you're covering up the fact, that there were additional 7 flown in communities around Gaza. So it wasn't just 2, it was a total of 9. You're saying that there were no rockets that were flown into Tel Aviv is pretty much equal to when Robert David Steele said that they're child slaves on Mars. You claim that Israel bombed civilian areas. Well, Israel says that they bombed military targets. Hamas hasn't disputed what Israel said. They haven't said that they destroyed hospitals, schools. That comes out of the recesses of your mind. I looked for any of this information that you've said, and it's nowhere on the internet, unless you have some special Mossad, FBI insider information. Oh yeah, you don't have any inside information. So the whole thing is just a figment of your imagination.
Because of that. That's literally what they think, or at least what they want you to think they think. I don't think they care. I think this is all about manipulating perception. But this story is unsettling because it really gives you an insight into what these people really are at the end of the day. Now, as you may not know, as I reported yesterday, they attacked Gaza yesterday, but they also just yesterday, right after this, warned that they would use uncompromising force against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip should the UN Security Council not unequivocally condemn the alleged launching of 2 rockets that harmed no one and hit nothing.
Again, you repeat the same.
Well, they don't care about the 100 different targets they launched on a
attack on
civilian
Tel Aviv.
location. Now, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations.
While it's not alleged that 100 rockets hit in Gaza. While you're outraged that Israel dropped hundreds of bombs in Gaza and didn't kill a soul, when it comes to Israel being attacked, you don't believe it, and then you say, even if it did occur, there were only firecrackers. So later on, I'm going to show you what kind of firecrackers that the Gazans flew to Tel Aviv. All you pro-Hamas propagandists should stop using the word firecracker, because you're using terminology and you're referencing small rockets that were used in the 1990s. And Iran has been supplying and upgrading the systems that Gaza Hamas has now. No problem with that goings on. Shooting into a population of 3.5 million people. But you have a big problem when Israel defends itself and takes out some military positions in Gaza, because there's no place else to bomb. I mean, do you want them not to take out operational positions? Should they just take the bombs and let them get killed? Is that what you feel is the right situation? That Israel should just sit back and take the hits? Well, they're not going to do that. I mean, then you're living in a dream world.
Civilian location. Now, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Tenon, sent a letter to the UN Security Council in which he called on the members to meet and condemn, specifically and alone, the 2 homemade rockets allegedly launched from the besieged Gaza Strip towards Tel Aviv. Now, in the letter, Dan wrote, he says, quote, "The terrorists that fired..."
If you think that any other country would have tolerated thousands of missiles flying into their borders, into their villages, and their home country, then you are not dealing with the real world. America would have occupied Gaza in a second to control that situation. You see, instead of just spouting nonsense, talking about homemade rockets as if they're made out of Coke bottles with a little alcohol in them, like a Molotov cocktail, why don't you do a little research and find what kind of rockets were actually sent to Tel Aviv? These were huge rockets. These were the Fajar 5. They're 500 kilogram rockets with about 275 pounds of shrapnel and 50 kilo of a TNT, or not TNT, some other type of very strong explosive. So I'll show you a video and show you what kind of damage this does.
Over there, that's the center.
Wow, look at these firecrackers. They look very small to me. From the time the missile is launched from Gaza until it goes to Tel Aviv, the people have about 60
The
seconds.
Fajr 5, a rocket threat from Gaza.
75 seconds to scramble
In
into
recent
a
years,
shelter
thousands
that
of
will
Qassam
protect
and Grant rockets have been fired upon Israel from the Gaza Strip. Hamas upgraded its arsenal by acquiring Iranian-made Fajr 5 rockets. The Fajr's 90-kilogram warhead stands as Hamas's largest and most lethal threat. Within its range of 75 kilometers lies the largest population center in Israel, the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. If launched, the rocket would inevitably paralyze the Israeli economy and school system, threatening more than 3.5 million civilians in the heart of Israel.
Now, in the letter, Dan wrote, he says, quote, "The terrorists that fired these rockets into Israel's most populated civilian area did so while hiding behind Palestinian civilians in Gaza and exploited them as human shields." Now, really take a moment and think about what he just said. So they know, he's admitting that they know if first of all, that's not accurate, that these people are using these civilian locations to launch. That's not what's really happening. But let's just say for the sake of conversation that it is. They're admitting that the people that they fired these rockets were using innocent people to hide behind. And regardless, they launched rockets at them. So that means that they knowingly launched rockets at civilian locations because they're using them as human shields. This is their logic, that it's okay because Hamas. That's what they always do. Well, Hamas is bad and they're using human shields, so we can kill children at the fence line because Hamas. This is what they want you to think. But that in and of itself is a war crime. You can't just arbitrarily disregard the lives of people.
So you make fun and you say, the most populated area. Yeah, it's the most densely largest city in all of Israel. 3.5 million people. That's a lot of people. Why make fun of that? And Danny Danone did not say that they shot those rockets at and targeted positions that were surrounded by people as human shields. You're saying that. That's not what he said. You're putting words in his mouth. He was saying that the people who shot the rockets had the human shields. He didn't say that Israeli attacked those positions which was surrounded by human shields, because nobody was killed. It was a beautiful raid. And so, according to your great, vast knowledge of rules of engagement, you say that, if there are people in human shields, then you can't hit them. It's not a valid military target. Well, you're wrong about that. Why don't you learn about military targets and rules of engagement? I mean, just think about it. If every time they would shoot a Fajar 5 and all they did was surround people, so all their sites are protected by human shields, are you saying that Israel lost the war? That they can't take out these sites? You got to use your head, my man. Use your head. And the same thing goes for the fence. If the people are aiding and abetting the terrorists amongst them, encircling all the killers that are in the crowd, they are part and parcel, part of the terrorist activity. They're not being forced, especially when they're not being forced. They lose their rights of a citizen and end up being part of the military operation.
You can't just arbitrarily disregard the lives of people that are being held hostage, if that is even real. And I argue that it's not. Now, Israel on Thursday struck civilian facilities, including schools, hospitals, mosques, claiming to have hit over 100 different targets. And this is what they want you to condemn these two wayward missiles that didn't do anything in Israel. If they're even real, while they're saying we hit schools, hospitals, mosques, because Hamas is hiding behind them, but that's okay, because we're Israel and we get away with what we want. Now, these airstrikes were reminiscent of Israel's 2000.
Again, you repeat the same lies that Israel were hitting civilian targets, mosques, hospitals, schools, the same bullshit. And let me get this straight. So, if Mexico shoots a couple of dozen high-grade rockets into Houston, into New York, well, we have the Russians shipping stuff to Alaska and to California. And they don't hit anything. Are you saying that well, we don't have to do anything because it didn't hit anybody, it did no harm? Forget about it, Russia. We're just gonna stay cool. We're cool about it. You see, the fact that 2,000 people were killed, many of them civilians, doesn't necessarily mean that they did anything wrong. I trust that General Dempsey, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an honorable man, would know better than you. And I'm going to show a clip of what he had to say about that situation.
Behind them, but that's okay, because we're Israel and we get away with what we want. Now, these airstrikes were reminiscent of Israel's 2014 assault on Gaza, in which more than 2,000 Palestinians, including more than 500 women and children, were killed. And, I guess we're still waiting to see how they get held accountable for that one.
And how could you assert and compare 2004, where 2,000 people were killed, to what happened now, where 100 sorties took place and nobody was killed? It's absurd. It's not reasonable. What the hell are you talking about?
I actually do think that Israel went to extraordinary lengths to limit collateral damage and civilian casualties. In fact, about 3 months ago, we asked Benny if we could send a lessons learned team. One of the things we do better than anybody, I think, is learn. And we sent a team of senior officers and non-commissioned officers over to work with the IDF to get the lessons from that particular operation in Gaza, to include the measures they took to prevent civilian casualties and what they did with tunneling, because Hamas had become very nearly a subterranean society. And so, that caused the IDF some significant challenges. But they did some extraordinary things to try to limit civilian casualties, to include calling out, making it known that they were going to destroy a particular structure. Even developed some techniques they called it roof knocking, to have something knock on the roof. They would display leaflets to warn the citizens and population to move away from where these tunnels. But look, in this kind of conflict, where you are held to a standard that your enemy is not held to, you're going to be criticized for civilian casualties. So I think if Benny were sitting here right now, he would say to you, we did everything we could. And now we've learned from that mission, and we think there's some other things we could do in the future, and we'll do those. The IDF is not interested in creating civilian casualties. They're interested in stopping the shooting of rockets and missiles out of the Gaza Strip and into Israel. And it's an incredibly difficult environment. But I can say to you with confidence that I think they're acting responsibly. They acted responsibly. Although I think Human Rights Watch just published a report that there were civilian casualties, and that's tragic. But I think the IDF did what they could.
Israel causing new crisis in Gaza. Now, if you remember the show from yesterday, for maybe those that weren't here, Hamas was meeting with delegates from Egypt. And this is verified, while they supposedly launched rockets. And of course, even at the time, both an Israeli journalist citing an Israeli military official, as well as the IDF and Israeli government themselves, admitted that this wasn't Hamas. That they just simply broadly said, well, Hamas is over there, so anything that happens in this area, we're going to blame on Hamas. They literally said that. which is just absolutely hypocritical. Like I said, well, then you could argue the same thing and saying, well, technically you consider this all occupied Israel, occupied Palestine. So everything that happens here is your fault. It's just stupid. But so that it's verified that they were not responsible for this. They just don't care. And yet they still bombed 100 targets. And they want you to condemn the 2 random people who shot these other bottle rockets at Israel. Now, Hamas said yesterday that Israel is causing this new crisis.
The truth is actually probably the exact opposite of what you were postulating. The fact that 2 rockets were flown over Tel Aviv that could have killed hundreds of people, and what was it, a month ago? I think the last time that Hamas shot rockets, it was over 500 rockets, and Netanyahu, they dropped about 150 bombs only, and that was the end of it. He looked very weak after that, and so the pressure was for him to go into Gaza and reoccupy. And so the only way he could have looked semi-strong is if they came out with this story that the rockets either were for somebody else or that they went off accidentally, because that was another report. These 2 reports that they came out, they were shot accidentally, or somebody else shot them. That's my opinion. Pretty much like a tape recorder, you just espouse the same lie that they targeted civilian areas. Why would you do that if you know it's not true? They had 100 bombings, and not one person was killed. So how is it possible? What you're saying? Think. Just think for a second. Use your head. If they bombed these massive bombs, you go into a city and you drop 100 bombs. It was probably more than 100. Each plane has 2 or 4. So how the heck do you say that they were targeting civilians? I mean, this is a pure piece of utter propaganda.
Bottle rockets at Israel. Now, Hamas said yesterday that Israel is causing this new crisis in the Gaza Strip through this military escalation, and it's targeting deliberately of Palestinian civilian facilities. In a press release, Hamas spokesman Fauzi Barum said, quote, "The latest Israeli escalation in Gaza is a new crime added to the criminal record of the Israeli occupation." Barum blamed Israel for the potential repercussions of this escalation, stressing that Hamas, quote, "knows very well how to deal with this criminal occupation, as well as how to prevent Israel from using Palestinian blood to fuel electoral campaigns." Obviously referring to the accusations that their entire effort here, the escalation, the bombings, is all being used for their electoral ambitions because the upcoming general election on April 9th. And this is a point we made very clear in the last show, and it makes perfect sense. Using this as a way to drum up support for their campaign. It's the same, just like in Yemen, where they're literally starving an entire nation to death for a geostrategic point, to be able to control this point on the map. These people are, if not psychopaths, utter sociopaths for their disregard for human life to achieve their agenda.
It's so bizarre that you would actually reference a quote from Hamas that Israel is causing new crisis in Gaza. The people are trying to settle and just have a normal life, not trying to harm the Palestinians. Those people are the bad guys. The good guys are the organization that wants to wipe out the state of Israel, that wants to send people through tunnels to kill families in Israel. And yes, the point of Hamas is not to make the lives of their people better. because otherwise they could have just left this military, all these military operations, or you call them the terrorist operations, alone, and concentrate on building their society up. So they're not looking out for the best of for their people, whereas Israel is. Despite all the terror, Israel still maintains a normal civilian life. They've created so many medicines, like a cure for cancer now, for many cancers, all type of mechanical devices to help people who are paralyzed to be able to walk. They just invented a new artificial electronic heart. It's amazing how you instead of thinking of a way to perhaps support a peaceful community in Gaza, convincing them, look, just put your weapons down and make peace with Israel so you could have better lives. And there'll be more pressure on Israel than to make a peace deal. You just ferment the anger against Israel and give false hopes to the Palestinian people that one day they will somehow take over Israel, which will never happen. I mean, is that what you think will happen? Is that you'll incite somehow the world enough so that they'll attack Israel? Do you think Israel's going to relinquish land because of a BDS movement? That also is not dealing with reality. BDS is primarily a European phenomenon, but Israel has great allies in other countries, and big allies like India, China, Russia, who are not involved in BDS. While BDS is getting stronger, Israel's GDP has gone up every single year. So there's actually an opposite correlation. As BDS is getting more acceptable, Israel's GDP is getting higher because of these relationships in other countries. When the Palestinians are ready to put the guns down and Israel feels more comfortable that these people are ready to commit to a peaceful coexistence, then Israel will make peace with them. Right now, it's impossible for them to make peace with them. There's 71% of Israel thinks it's immoral to hold onto the West Bank. The majority of them also say that they can't do it right now, and they haven't been able to do it. It's too dangerous. So I understand it's not your life or your family's life that is up for grabs. So you could just, in your mind, just say, hey, give them back the West Bank, get out of the West Bank. But their lives are on the line. It's not going to happen. They have Gaza with rockets shooting all over the place. And you expect Israel in their right mind to have the same thing in the West Bank? And the Gaza people, they're not just looking for West Bank. They're not just looking to have some freedom in Gaza. They're looking to get their homes back that were in Israel. That will never happen. They're not going to take over Israel. Their dream is to kick out the Yahud, to destroy them and replace them. And frankly, I don't consider fourth and fifth generation descendants of refugees to be refugees. It's never been the case that descendants of refugees were also designated as refugees. This is the first time in history that descendants of refugees are called refugees. So propagandists, I'm not done with you. I'm not going to make one after the other videos, but I'll be looking out for your videos and picking and choosing carefully what I feel is a disgrace for you as to what you're lying about.